Hello and welcome to the NewCity podcast. Is that what we're calling it, the NewCity podcast?
That's what we're calling it now.
Alright, my name is Lone Pine, and I'm here with Super Soup.
What's up, guys? How's it going? Hopefully well.
Going?
Yeah, it's like Blue's Clues. Like I'm expecting, we're doing great. No.
Well, our audience is entirely 5-year-olds.
Oh, of course. Either 5-year-olds or 5-year-olds at heart, as I am. Never lose that sense of wonder.
You can't really be a game developer unless you're, got a little bit of a kid at heart.
Oh, of course. Speaking of binary, did you know you can basically count to 31 on one hand using binary?
Yeah. I find that really difficult though because my ring finger and my middle finger kind of want to move together.
Oh yeah, no, I've got the same problem. It's
Yeah.
hard, but I was just playing around with it per a Reddit thread the other day, and I found it really interesting just as a thought experiment.
Yeah. So I guess I'm enough of a nerd to I did that as like a kid, like a young teen, when I first learned about like computers and binary. And
that's your pedigree.
yeah, the system that I figured out was, I take my middle finger and my ring finger and I just kind of treat them as one big finger.
So then basically one hand is
Is 4 bits.
It's 4 bits.
And with 2 hands you have 8 bits, which is a byte.
Which is perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect. And you can count up to 256.
Right.
No, you can count up to 255.
Because 0 is a valid state.
Right. So at that point, you have to start going to toes, I guess.
Right. Somebody was saying that you can reserve some fingers kind of like a floating point and get more.
Oh.
But that was a little... I didn't tinker with that.
So I've had a dream for a while of making a kind of computer. It would be built around like a Raspberry Pi, and on the back, so you'd kind of hold it like like a RC car remote.
Right.
So you'd hold it like that, and on the back there'd be 8 piano keys, 4 on each side, and so you'd put your fingers there, and then you could do, with kind of like a binary thing. It's called a chorded keyboard, so you can do a bunch of different keys. That would be like 2 to the 8th keys, and then because our thumbs are pretty flexible, you could like put like a D-pad under each thumb, or something like that.
Shift the octave up or down.
Right, and then so you could get potentially like thousands of keys or thousands of different kind of key combinations.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So like my dream is to like build this thing, and I would basically just use it as like kind of a notepad,
right,
and like a terminal, like a Linux terminal. This is like the reason why I can't go back to Windows anymore is because like the terminal is so incredibly useful and powerful and fun.
Right.
So like, why do I use Linux instead of Windows? There's a lot of good reasons not to. But
well, that could be said for any operating system. It's always a bundle of why you would use it and why you wouldn't use it, and then a lot of it comes down to personal preference or kind of where the applications are that you're using most frequently.
And I think that personal preference wouldn't matter to me that much because there is a lot that's kind of obnoxious or burdensome about Linux. But the thing that really makes it impossible for me to use Windows is the Windows doesn't, or at least it didn't have a good terminal. Now, I haven't used the new system, the WSL. That might have solved the problem, but I haven't used it.
Yeah, the Windows subsystem for Linux is basically just Linux running in. It's like a virtual machine for Linux, and you have full access. Other than like a, GNOME-based desktop, you don't get that, of course, but you have full access to the terminal and all apt-get and everything.
Right.
So that's pretty fun. And then Windows has definitely been improving their terminal experience with like the PowerShell, and they have like that new Windows terminal that I think is still in beta that's kind of brings them all together in one place. So you can have, like, if I understand correctly, like a tab open to PowerShell and like a tab open to your Windows subsystem for Linux, and then a tab open to like the classic command prompt.
Yeah, so the reason why another compelling thing that keeps me with Linux is to have these tiling window managers. And not everybody who uses Linux uses these, but I do, and I'm kind of addicted to it. I really don't like floating windows, and that's why there's no floating windows in the game. Is because I've been super resistant to it. When Super Soup came on, pretty much the first thing he wanted to do was implement floating windows.
And if I may be so bold, I had a working prototype that was not perfect.
You did,
but
yeah.
It was sort of a, okay, well, do we want to take this direction? Do we want to polish this up and get it ready for use? And we decided no at the time.
At the time, but I think that I might be persuaded to change my mind. For the video podcast, I'm going to show a little bit of the newspaper. And the reason why is because I want to show all of the UI. We do have quite a bit of UI. And I shared a screenshot on the Discord, and I was joking that I could complete the puzzle, by which I mean that, I've divided up the screen space into like different.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So, and I mean it's a bit of a joke, but so the question that we're gonna have moving forward is, now that we have so many different UI panels, and there's going to be some desire to, have more than one of them open at a time, or put them in a different part of the screen. So what I would like is, I'll tolerate floating windows if the default system doesn't force me to use the floating windows, if that makes sense.
I think, like any feature, it'll be there if you want it.
Right.
You just don't have to use it.
Right. But it's a design issue, because if you design with the intention that, the users are just going to move the windows around to where they want, then you won't design an intelligent system to place them.
Right. And this also harkens to my comments regarding, train of thought. Speaking of trains and rails and whatnot, my train of thought derailed. But I remember making a similar argument for some feature where it was kind of like, we want. Oh, it was the fact that we were moving more and more things into toggles in options. And it's like, we got to come to a point where we kind of have to decide what the default is, because that's how the game's going to be balanced. We can't have, like, if we were to add utilities, they couldn't be a toggle that you could just, you can build a city.
Yeah.
and since that was not part of the fundamental game design, that's my argument where we probably shouldn't have utilities in the traditional expected sense, but the idea of buildings that can buff your city, like we were talking about radio or television or whatnot, things that can offer a buff that is not required. You know what I mean? That is a good layered layer feature, as opposed to like what would be an intrinsic one, which is power, water, garbage, etc.
Right. Um. So, you're not gonna like this. I know. Like I've read the story about Warcraft, how they implemented a nerf, but then they turned it into a buff because people didn't like it as a nerf. And
Well, that was simply presentation. That was regarding
right, right,
rest in Warcraft, and yeah, rather than make it a debuff, they made it into okay. Well, if you log out for a certain amount of time, you get bonus experience instead of that being the standard, and then you getting less experience.
right.
Just pure presentation.
And we're talking about like so maybe you can place a radio tower somewhere in your city, and that gives some sort of buff. Um, and my thinking was that there has to be kind of a debuff that goes with that. So like we have to debuff the game in general so that the radio tower can buff it back. You know, it. I mean,
Right. And
if
then
we
presentation wise, we wouldn't want to phrase it as like, "Oh, you're under this debuff until this happens."
right,
We still
yeah,
want to put we would still want to present it as, oh, add the radio, get this. But by the same token, we'll also want to be mindful of the people who've been playing for a while and have old saves. We don't want to destroy old saves by like
yeah. That's kind of
crippling something.
right. That's a pretty complicated issue. I guess it's a question of like, um, does the game already need to be easier, harder, or is it correctly balanced? Um, and
And
I
then of
think
course, and then we rope in
right.
difficulty levels into that.
Well, I think that probably um, easy mode maybe should get easier. I think hard mode should probably stay about the same. And we have a very hard, but we don't really use it. So we should definitely make very hard harder.
Yeah, very hard should be kind of our brutal, like, hey, we don't even know if this is possible.
Right,
Good
right.
luck.
Like I think our target for very hard should be um, uh, do we believe that anyone could beat this?
Right.
If no one beats it, then it's probably impossible. If plenty of people can beat it, then it's probably too easy.
Right.
Um,
And by beat it, you're referring to getting that first skyscraper.
yeah, yeah, that would be
That's our win
that's our
condition.
win condition. Yep, yep. Um, so since you brought up the utilities, my thinking was, um, and this might be more of a debuff to existing cities than you might like. But my thinking was, so let's talk about the telephone utility. So I was thinking that the telephone utility would have a particular impact on the on the office zone, and
That makes sense.
the rule would be that your office zone is capped at a certain density, maybe 5, until you place the telephone utility somewhere within the radius.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then
Density or like even value. I think they should probably buff value too.
maybe. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so the 4 utilities that we talked about
Ooh,
implementing. Go ahead.
ooh. Telephone can buff community.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I like that idea. Um, the 4 utilities that we were talking about implementing would be electricity, um, telephone, radio, and television. And we're not sure if radio and television are distinct yet.
Right.
Um, but radio and or television will probably have the biggest impact on retail. Electricity would have kind of general impacts, but I think that it would have a particular impact on industry. And then the telephone would have a particular impact on the office zone.
I'm wondering because electricity sounds fundamental, but our goal is that it wouldn't be needed for a city to exist or function. So I wonder if there isn't some other utility that would be a buff to industry that we could call that instead of electricity. Something like
Freight and rail,
natural gas. I don't know. Yeah.
seaports.
Well, that's not really a utility. That's going to be its own modular like amenity, seaports and whatnot, and freight and rails up to the player. But like, yeah, what about like natural gas?
Um, I guess we could do that. Um, so let's go back to the UI a little bit because I wanted to show completing the puzzle. Um,
Okay.
so share my screen again so you can see what I'm doing.
Roger,
We've been
Roger.
recording for 57 minutes, FYI. So if you wanted to go for an hour, we could finish up in a few minutes.
Yeah, let's do that.
Cool. So this is the newspaper that we're going to be releasing in a couple of weeks, hopefully. Um, and so I was joking about like completing the puzzle. So you can see that it kind of the amount of space that it takes up. So if I moved it up a little bit, it would take up this space. And then there's the in-game console, which we currently have this kind of Quake style console that's like this.
Right. And the console, I wouldn't see as part of the fundamental UI. It's meant to kind of be its own separate mode almost when it's open.
Sure, sure. But uh well, so humor me on this, all right? So it would be a little bit of a reduction in the space granted to the console, I admit, but wouldn't it be kind of cool if it fit here, in this space? I don't know if you can see my cursor. I guess you
I
can't.
can. No, I can.
Oh,
And I
really?
can see
Okay.
that space.
Yeah.
My main concern, like you pointed out, the console's meant to offer a lot of info. Shrinking the space may not be conducive to the goal of the console.
Yeah. Um,
What else could we fit there besides the console?
well, you know what? We wouldn't be shrinking the vertical space all that much. Um, and we'd be shrinking the horizontal space, but as you can see, we're really not using this horizontal space.
Well, but by the same token, not every line is going to be as short as just our basic little outputs. Especially when you start entering certain commands. Is render info in here?
Um, no. I didn't merge that in when I implemented the hash
Not
map draw buffer.
Yeah,
Um,
because the console serves a purpose for us in development as debug tools and whatnot, and so shrinking the horizontal space is going to be very limiting. Now, I being multi lines or text boxes, I assume it kind of handles wrapping on its own.
it does.
However, that may be breaking up lines unnecessarily, making it just kind of difficult to read data. That's my only concern.
Okay. Um, and then we can also show the Citopedia. I haven't pulled down your latest version. Mitch did a great job of he's getting the Citopedia started. Um, so the
I'm going to be
Citop-
writing like probably 90% of the articles, hopefully.
Yep, yep.
And then it's kind of like a little written tutorial almost, as well as deep dives into different like the heat map metrics and the tools. And ideally, the Citopedia should answer any questions, any FAQ style questions we've been answering on Discord.
Right.
It just kind of explained the game in a very verbose fashion.
Mm-hmm. Um, so, uh, you know, when I talk about completing the puzzle, I don't know, like, I guess maybe the newspaper would get smaller, move over this way, so that, like, we could have. There's a set of panels that I call left panels. The Citopedia is one of them, the selection panel, the budget panel, the charts panel. Um, and I always like to point out this tab because a lot of people don't notice it. So you can keep tabs on these education limits, which is pretty important. Um, uh, there's a couple other left panels. There's a transit panel and some other things. Um, but if we had floating windows, if we want to go in the direction of floating windows, then rather than having a concept of a left panel, we would probably just have a more general concept of like a panel that can appear anywhere, and many of them would appear on the left.
Right,
But
they'd have a default location, and
right, they
like,
could be moved around. Would you want the game to store in the options file like how the player has arranged their UI?
yeah, that makes perfect sense to me because we'll just store a vec3 position, for each panel, and
Mm,
that's not going to be very expensive, or and then just read back. That makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Then there should be, by the same token, there should be a button in options or whatever that just reset UI to default.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Um. Uh. One thing that this might be too complicated to implement, but I think would be pretty cool. It'd be pretty unique if we did uh, manage to implement this. Is what if we could have a second window that would appear on your second monitor if you have a second monitor, um,
Right.
and you could put uh, any of the UI. So you could put the charts panel. You
Just
could
drag
put
them
the
over.
budget. Yeah, something like
We're
that.
we're gonna have to be mindful of the fact that for Windows and Linux, when you're arranging your virtual desktop, if you will, with multiple monitors, you can technically put them in any position around each other. We'll need to kind of obey that in terms of if they've got two monitors vertically on top of one another, that you move
Right.
your mouse up and off the top, and kind of being how and maybe it's easier than I'm imagining it, but I'm imagining that we'll have to account for that. That you move your mouse
Right.
up and off the top of the main window, then it
Does
would enter the bottom of the second.
does the is there a way like through GLFW to get that information?
That's a good question, and I think so.
Yeah.
I would just need to research, but then also, making sure our movable panels would carry over.
Right.
When
So
it goes
I
off
didn't
the screen on one.
yeah, so I didn't think about it as I was thinking about it as just like it's a second window. You can't move things between them, but the second window would have some
Oh, that
sort
could be.
of system. Like they'd have just like a button with like a plus sign, and you click on it, and then you can like choose. Okay, I want this window open, and this window open, and this window open.
Yeah, totally. Like that, or for the movable windows on the main, you could have a button that you could click to send a second window.
Yeah, yeah, that might be simpler.
And then by the same token, let's say someone has a second monitor, they position it over there. We'll need to store which monitor, which window it's in, and its position. And then if we detect that that window or that monitor is no longer available,
Mm-hmm.
then we'll need to, reset it back to
Right.
its default.
Right. Well, that's pretty exciting.
It's good times.
Yeah.
Onward and upward.
It's and we can't promise all of these features. It's just a two-man team. Um, uh, we're prioritizing the features that we think are going to be best for the game moving forward, and taking into account your feedback. We haven't done a council member poll in a while.
We have not. There's a couple things. We definitely should do a council member poll. We also need. There's a few more Kickstarter rewards that we need to do. I think the interviews with
The
you,
interviews
and
and
then
the
the
statues.
statues.
Right.
Yep.
Um, definitely should get that sorted just so that it's off our minds, And I'm sure that.
For sure.
Yeah, I'm sure that people, it'll be really cool when we have the statues. So the way that the statues are going to work, looking for like a government building. So like imagine like instead of this little fountain here, let me turn it to day. Instead of this little fountain here, it might have a statue. And then it will randomly select a statue from like the set. And how many people did we have? We had like 60 people that
sounds about right.
Get a statue.
Without having it in front of me, it says 60 sounds about right.
Yeah. And so, what I was thinking was if you selected the building, and this panel is, needed to be fixed for a long time. This panel is a total mess. But, the idea is that it would have somewhere in this panel, it would say, this building has a statue of so-and-so.
Right.
So they get acknowledged in that way. In the same way that, and it might be the same name, So
right.
We have like the Stephen Coleman Graduate School. So it might be, has a statue of Stephen Coleman. Or it might be somebody else, who knows.
I like it.
Yep, that'll be cool. So today I want to talk about how the cars work.
Specifically lanes, right?
Merging. So merging is the goal for this week. Or is a goal. I wanted to talk through it before I get started, so that I kind of know what I'm going to implement. I don't know. Personally, it helps me to talk through things. So, when you think about like how do cars move in the game, my approach has always been, so every bit of the road system has this internal lane block, which is these white lines here. And if you make an intersection...
Are you recording your desktop too?
I am. Let me go live on Discord so you can see what I'm doing.
Sure. This is going to be a video podcast. That's novel.
Yeah, why not?
If you will.
So if you look at an intersection, it's a bit chaotic, maybe a bit complicated to see, but there's multiple of these lane blocks inside of it. And the cars know which chain or series of lane blocks they want to take, and they just follow that path. And every lane block can be composed of multiple lanes. So this one here is 4 lanes, and this one here is, well, it's 2 lane blocks, one going in each direction, and each lane block has 2 lanes inside of it. So if you have a car that's going up this way and it wants to turn right, it has to be in the right lane at the end of the lane. So at some point, if it starts in the left lane, at some point it has to merge into the right lane or move to the right lane somehow. And the problem is that they have to interact with each other. So, whoa, car's going a little nuts here. There's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done.
Bug number one?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done, here. So, one of the issues... So when I refactored the vehicle system a few months ago, and the change that I made was I made it so that the vehicle physics, I call it, happened in a different thread than the game thread. And we do try to do a lot of multi-threading because modern computers are multi-core, and the only way to get more performance is to be more parallel or more concurrent in some way.
Concurrency and asynchronous functions.
Right. That's kind of the fallout of, people say that Moore's law is dead, and the truth is that growth in what's called single-threaded performance is dead. So we're no longer getting faster cores, but we're getting more cores.
Moore's law has seeped into the threads of the fabric of computing.
Right.
See? Threads. Fabric. I'll be here all night.
So, that change made things a lot more complicated, because multi-threading is just inherently a lot more complicated than single threading. So like the system has to communicate back and forth between the two threads and copy over all of the data, because at some point the information about this vehicle is here at this instant, that has to be communicated to the game thread at some point. That ends up being, a lot more complicated and a lot more work. I definitely think that our vehicle system currently is worse than it was before, in every sense other than maybe it's more performant, like less stress on the game thread. We need to kind of catch the vehicle system up, fix the bugs, and one of the big bugs that people complain about is these vehicles all overlap, right? And that's because they're merging in kind of a dumb way. So let's see if we can kind of catch it happening. So we got these vehicles coming up here, and they all think that they need to be in the right lane, for whatever reason. So they get to the end of the lane block, and then they think, oh, I gotta merge over, and they see this, long crowded line of vehicles, and they just insert themselves in there because there isn't like a proper, merging system that detects that there, that there isn't any space in the lane and prevents them from moving. And so for a long time, my idea for how to make this work was I gave every vehicle 2 physical locations. Um, and one physical location was where it was in its lane, and the other physical location was where it wanted to go, um, which I called the pilot. Um, and um, essentially, the vehicles kind of collide. It's not really collision detection, but the vehicle location in the lane is how it prevents them, how it's supposed to prevent them from bunching up like this, so that they don't overlap. And so my idea was, if a vehicle is merging, then it's straddling two lanes. And I think my thought was also, like, if a vehicle gets to the end of a lane block, like it enters an intersection, that it would have a location in the lane block that it was coming from and a location in the intersection that it was going into. And that way it could kind of occupy both spaces and prevent collisions in both spaces. And this system really has not worked out very well. The number one problem is jams.
Like this.
Well, so to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. So, like, this is a situation that can resolve eventually. Like, any given vehicle, if you select it, eventually it will be able to exit this situation. So this isn't like a hard jam.
I will say though that that's one of the most a very common bug report, and one that I have personally experienced, where these sorts of jams occur,
Right.
and then like the car at the end never proceeds. And some players have noticed that it's because the car at the end is seemingly waiting on a car behind it, and so it just creates a situation when nothing moves.
Right. So that what you're talking about there is a hard jam. So this is a soft jam, and what you're talking about is a hard jam.
Okay.
And we want soft jams because that's part of the game mechanics, that you get traffic jams and then you have to, like, change.
Naturally, it's just a part of cities.
And you have to change something as a player. You have to do something like build a mass transit system or build a different roadway in
Right.
order to fix the soft jam. But a hard jam, so I had a very common problem, and what you're talking about is a genuine bug, and we need to go in and fix that bug. For a long time, there was a particular situation where if you had kind of like a roundabout like this,
Mm-hmm.
All of the cars would collect in the middle of the roundabout, and then they would kind of jam against each other, and that became a hard jam. And essentially, there's kind of like a certain amount of physical space, and due to the kind of the physics of it, the cars kind of densify within that space, and eventually they get to a density that they can't escape from because there's no movement that's possible.
Right.
And so my solution there has been to make it so that as the cars are traveling along, they look ahead of themselves, and if they see a lot of density, they slow down. And this makes the traffic behave pretty fluidly, and it also prevents this particular problem. So my new idea with merging is that so, like, let's say that this car wants to merge into the right lane, so it sees this open space here. So what it's going to do is it's going to see this vehicle, the truck here, the green pickup, and force that truck into a yield state. So the yields, so the truck will be marked as yielding to the white car, and the white car will be marked as being yielded to from the green pickup, and then it will match the speed and find the space, and it will enter that space, and the green pickup will stop and wait for the white car. Um, uh, so the white car will still only be in one place at one time. So
Right.
we're removing the idea that a car can be in two places at one time, just because that caused too many jams. Um, so at some point in time, the white car will move to this lane, and then the game will have to have some sort of animation, so that it doesn't look like it's just a jump. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to do the animation. If you watch the animation right now, is pretty crude. It kind of just shifts horizontally. Um, uh, there you go. You can see that there. And obviously, we want something better than that. Um, but the physics kind of comes first, and you can see that this physics is a little nuts. Like they're merging all the time, and they really should only be merging on occasion. One of the problems that I've had with the merging is, um, if the merging isn't aggressive enough, then when they get to the end of the lane, they can be in the wrong lane to make the turn, and then the question is kind of like, well, what do you do in that situation? Do you, the worst thing you can do is you can just sit there. And there's been versions of the game where that's what happened, and that causes hard jams.
Right.
Um, uh, the best thing that you could do in that situation is probably just make like a late merge, just like merge across at the end of the lane, um, or just teleport into the turn lane. Um, and the best thing to happen is just for that situation to never come up. But that requires that the cars aggressively merge before they get to the end of the lane.
Right.
And then it becomes this tuning issue of like, these cars are merging too often. Like they shouldn't be merging every update. And clearly that's what's happening here, is that they keep merging back and forth every
update.
It
looks like they're finding some pixel perfect gaps and then thinking, okay, I'm good to merge.
Yeah, so I was looking in the code, and the way that the merging is set up right now is, there's two rules. One is that they match the speed, and the other is that they match, or that there's a gap of a sufficient size. And I've set the gap size to 2 meters, which is obviously too small. And the reason why I set it so small was just because, I was probably frustrated, like it's difficult to tune these things. And then I also noticed that I put it as an or. So either they matched the speed or there was enough space. So they don't have to meet both conditions. And so, that's basically useless. So as I implement the new merging, I'm going to make it more that, they have to find a space, and they have to match speed, but I might make it so that, like, they only have to match the speed if the other vehicle is close enough. So if the other vehicle is far away, then the speed doesn't really matter that much, right?
Right.
Um,
Just taking advantage of the gap between cars.
right, right. So like, if if this guy here wanted to merge into this lane, um, he would probably tell this guy to yield, but this guy wouldn't actually change his behavior because he's so far away. He might slow down a little bit, but he's not going to like just stop there and wait for the green car to enter the lane.
Right.
Um. Uh. So, one of the reasons why this is kind of important is we're trying to support multi-car vehicles, particularly trains. But it can also mean like an articulated bus, like a bus with two parts, or
Right.
a semi truck where the head is separate from the trailer. And I want a system that can support these kinds of multi-car vehicles and the merging together in the complicated chaos of a full road system. Like that's the
Right.
complete system, and so that's what we're working towards. I'm just building a little train line right now so that I can show you guys the trains. All right, press F to stop. Let's just set the headway to a lot. Try to see if we can get a train to spawn. Come on, train. I don't know why my train's not spawning. Let me see if I have... I don't have it. Oh, there was the train. Alright.
Yo.
Yeah, so...
The train was there, and then it was gone.
Right. So you can see the train. It's, got multiple cars. If you look at it in the selection, you can actually, see that they're connected by this trailing trailer mechanism. So that's
Linked
how...
list.
Yeah, it's basically a linked list. So that's how that's how multi-car vehicles work. And so merging is going to have to be aware of the multiple cars. So if... And we don't have semi-trucks or any kind of multi-car. So basically right now the game has this limitation where we have the tracks and the trains that have multi-car vehicles, but each of the lane blocks is only one lane going in each direction.
Right.
So there's no merging. And in the road system and the highway system, we have cars, but we don't have any multi-car vehicles, so the semi-trucks are disabled. And that's because there's a conflict between the multi-car vehicles, the merging, and it causes hard jams. So, just to prevent hard jams while we're, working through all these systems and bugs. But if we had the semis, and you imagine there was a semi coming along here and it wanted to merge into this lane in front of this gray sports car, the gray sports car would have to know to wait for both parts of the semi-truck.
Right.
So it would have to look at the back of the semi-truck.
So we're basically going to need to multiply the gap by the number of vehicles in a total vehicle.
Something like that, yeah. I'm not sure. So what I'm thinking is that like the head of the semi truck only looks for enough space for itself. Um, and if it's like straddling two lanes, so like the head is here and the trailer is here, kind of like awkwardly spread across lanes. And if it was like waiting for something here, then it would just block both lanes. Um, and then once it was able to move along this lane, then its trailer would do the merging process again. So it would take over the merge, you know. So instead of telling the gray sports car, okay, we're done merging, you can stop the merging behavior, it would trade the merge flag, the yield flag, to the trailer.
Okay.
Um, and then wait for the trailer to be done. So if you imagine like a train system, imagine we had like a 4-track here, and there were two trains coming along, and one of them merged into let's say that it was folding down to just 2 tracks, one track in each direction. So both trains would want to occupy the same track at the same time. So one of them would come along, and it would get there first. It would win, and so it would start merging across into the one lane, and the other train would wait, and the head of the train would get the yield flag, and it would keep getting traded off to each car in the train that's ahead, until that train had completely passed. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yeah.
All right. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to implement.
So what's step 1?
Well, so I already started with um, setting up the data for the yield system. So the every car now has 2 more pieces of information. It has a yield to and a yield from. And with version 56, I put more space in the save file to store that. And then I set up, transferring the information between the 2 threads, the vehicle thread and the main game thread. And I also set it up so that when you select a car, so if I select part of the train, you see the vehicle head, trailer, trailing. So it's now also going to have information on like what is it yielding to, what is it yielding from.
Right.
The part that I haven't done yet, so that's step 1. So step 2 is changing the merging routine so that the next vehicle, so the merging routine right now, it does look in the other lane, and it gets the index of a vehicle in the other lane, and it uses that to determine if it can merge or not.
Okay.
But it doesn't do that. It doesn't it doesn't track it from update to update. So that's why we needed this new piece of data, like the yield to, yield from, so that it can keep track of what it's doing over multiple updates. So the next step is going to be to change the change the merging algorithm. Um, so let me think about like how that would work. So first of all, so like let's say that this white SUV wants to merge in front of this gray sports car. So the first thing that it needs to do is determine that it wants to merge, um, and also determine which lane it wants to merge to. Um, and there's two there's um, there's two reasons why a vehicle wants to merge. One is that it needs to be in a particular lane in order to make a turn, like it needs to be in the right lane or the left lane.
Right.
And the other is that it feels that its lane is too slow, like it's waiting for other cars, and so it wants to merge into a lane that's moving faster. And that second type I call an expedience merge. So the first type I call a route merge, and the second type I call an expedience merge.
Okay.
So this white SUV needs to determine, either based on the route or based on expedience, whether it wants to merge and whether it wants to merge right or left. And so let's say that it decides that it wants to merge to the right in front of this gray sports car. So the second thing that it needs to figure out is what's in this lane to the right. So it's going to do a lookup, and it's going to get this gray sports car. And, I'm wondering now if maybe it needs to get two cars, actually, because maybe it needs to get the second car that's in front of the gray sports car, so it knows how much space it has.
Right.
Once it's decided to commit to the merge, so there's it decides that it wants to merge, and then at some point it needs to commit to the merge, and once it commits to the merge, I'm not gonna implement a system by which a merge can be canceled. So once it commits, that merge is going to happen one way or another.
Right.
Although maybe I could implement a system to cancel, at least if it's an expedience merge. Like an expedience merge could probably be canceled. But I'll think about that. So once it's committed to the merge, then it's going to put the yield flag on the gray sports car. So the gray sports car, in its movement algorithm, it's going to see that it has the yield flag set, and so it's going to wait for the white SUV. And it might stop dead in its tracks, or it might slow down, or it might not change its behavior at all if like the white SUV is like way ahead in the lane.
Okay.
And in that case, like the yield flag isn't really necessary, but it is probably going to happen for simulation reasons, basically.
Right.
And so the gray sports car will, stop, it'll wait. And then the white SUV will wait for there to be enough space and for the speed to match. Essentially just wait for certain conditions to be met. And then it will actually execute the merge. And the merge is essentially a teleport. So it'll just teleport to this lane. But it also might, or there will be an animation that's shown to the player.
That makes
So,
sense. Yeah, so it has immediately completed the merge logically,
right.
but visually we're gonna gradually merge it over. That makes sense.
Um, so how to do that animation is going to be a follow up question. I want to get the physics correct first, and then worry about the animation later.
Right.
Um, so I was talking about like expedience merges and route merges, and that's the reason why they do this silly little dance here where they keep merging in and out, is
Right.
because all of them want to be in the right lane ultimately. Um, but they also see that the right lane is super crowded. So they're thinking, okay, well, I'll merge into the right lane, and then, um, oh, it's too crowded. I'm gonna merge into the left lane, try to get a little bit ahead, and then merge back into the right lane later on. Which is pretty rude, obviously. Um, and you can see that it really slows everything down. Um, and it's funny, like if you look in the building designer, like the vehicles kind of just stop in the middle, and start doing this silly little dance, and this is basically the reason why, is because they keep trying to um, they want to get in one lane for route reasons, but then they want to uh, get in the other lane to move ahead, and they just crowd each other and block each other up.
Right.
It seems like um, uh, you can tell that there's kind of like stepped updates going on in the background, and it seems like within the update that if it merges, it doesn't move forward as much, and I'm not
Right.
sure why that's the case really. So that's something hopefully will be fixed with this new merging algorithm.
Right. Awesome. Well, that's the high level overview then, I suppose.
Right.
And you've got step one on lock as far as what you need to do first. It
Mm-hmm.
seems like. Um, so what's so that's going to be your project moving into this patch, or is that going to be something that deploys with 56?
It probably deploy with 56. Um, uh, in addition to putting new information in the save file, um, uh, I want to have some time to test it and make sure that it works. Um, and I could potentially even release it after version 56,
Okay.
especially if we get the sense that it's a risky change. Um,
Right.
because if it causes more hard jams than we're already experiencing, and I acknowledge that people are experiencing hard jams. Um, so if it doesn't seem to reduce, but it seems to increase the number of hard jams that people experience, then we certainly wouldn't release that. Until we had more time to fix the issues,
Tighten it up.
to
Yeah.
tighten it up. Yeah. Um, and um, I need the extra information in the save file in version 56, but I can just write zeros into the save file, and that'll just work fine. So like if any particular car has its yield to set to 0, that means that it's not yielding to anything.
Right.
So if I just write all zeros into the save file,
And that as a default state's not a bad place to be.
exactly, exactly. All right. Anything else you wanted to say before we end?
Uh, just thank you to our community for their engagement, their enthusiasm. It's always encouraging to jump on Discord. We have a really, really positive community, which is rare these days.
Yep.
Uh, being community manager, I spend a lot of time looking at like AAA Twitter feeds and Reddit subreddits and forums, and just seeing kind of how other companies do it. And every single time I'm like, holy cow, I'm so thankful our community doesn't doesn't treat us the way that they treat those developers.
Yeah, we are particularly lucky. We're very fortunate.
So thank you all, and we hope you enjoy. As always, we look forward to seeing what you build.
Yeah, look forward to seeing what you build.
And happy mayoring.
Happy mayoring.